Greetings, everyone. My name is Alois Hassler, but please call me Al. I was born a twin, but my brother died at birth. We lived in Minnesota, and my parents were German immigrants. My father, Joe, came to the United States in 1865 so that his mother could protect him, obviously, from being drafted into the German army. When my father arrived in Minnesota, he immediately signed up for the Union Army and fought in the United States Civil War. My family consisted of 4 step-siblings from my father's first wife and 1 full sister, Minnie. When our family came to Sublimity, I was 1 year old. This was the only place I remember my whole life. At the age of 19, I inherited the family farm after my father died working in the fields. It was a very sad day for all of us. St. Boniface Church was so important to our family. We participated in about every event that the church hosted. I remember my first Holy Communion in 1899. There were 26 kids of us that day. We had a big party when we dedicated the new addition to the main church, and of course the highlights every year was the chicken dinners with our family and friends from church. I married Anna Steffes when I was 24. She was very sickly because at the age of 15, she had become sick with tuberculosis and suffered from the disease our whole marriage. She managed it for a long time, and she believed it could be overcome by healthy foods. One of the foods she always ate was oranges, and she made all of us drink at least a quart of milk a day. I did not have to fight in World War I because I was exempt since I produced food from the farm. We were asked by the government to produce much more food with fewer workers. We also had to agree on a whole new set of regulations. Farmers had to agree to buy a tractor, which was pretty hard to do because they were producing steel for tanks, not tractors. We had to ship our products to markets, and that was even regulated by the Office of Defense and Transportation. We couldn't even set our prices because they were set by Congress and the Office of Price Administration. If I had had any problems with any of my workers, they were not handled by me, but the War Manpower Commission. Farming was now institutionalized, and farmers were becoming more and more dependent on the federal government. This made me interested in trying to make a change in my community. So I started serving on the city council, and later I ran and won the mayorship of this beautiful town. I also considered running for other offices in the government. This was a very busy time in our lives. We had a baby girl, Alma. Then 1 year later, another girl was born, Benicia. And I had to wait 5 more years before we had a boy, Edward. I listened to the Oregon Farm Radio Hour program every day while I took my lunch break. It fascinated me to learn new and innovative ways to farm. I decided to change my father's fruit orchard into a dairy farm to become more profitable. I still did grow some hay, grain, potatoes, cattle, sheep, hogs. The grain business grew into a huge, large commercial business of oats, wheat, and barley. After I farmed the land for years, it obviously became infertile, and I learned how to overcome this through different techniques. I also had the first electric fence in town for my dairy cows. Another first, I was the first farmer in town to use artificial insemination for my cows. It was a much faster way to increase my herd, and I could replace my cows with purebred Guernsey cows. There was some bulls that I don't believe liked that part of it, but we were moving ahead, forward, and innovative as we could. I also wanted to tell you another story of how God always provided for me and my family. One year, one of my usual buyers of my strawberries suddenly backed out. I panicked. How was I going to sell all these berries that I was counting on for money? After all, it was during the Great Depression. I decided to go into a bar in Salem, and I was lamenting my misfortune when a messenger boy overheard and told me about a cannery in South Salem that was processing strawberries. So I called them, and sure enough, the company bought my entire crop. I went back into the bar right away and asked about the messenger boy that was now missing. I asked everyone in the bar, and they said they never saw anyone like that the whole day. I think he was a messenger, all right, a messenger from God himself. I don't mean to brag, but one of the highlights of my life was that my 200-acre farm here in Sublimity was featured in the 1947 The Northwest Illustrated Farmer magazine. Just because I always learned and liked to do new and farming innovations. They wrote about how we rejuvenated the fields through an intensive program of fertilizing and irrigation. Back then, and in the article, it was the TVA, which was high phosphorus, obviously lime, to rejuvenate the land to make it more fertile than what it had been. Back to my family. My wife Anna became very sick with tuberculosis and became bedridden. So I decided she would be better off if I moved her to the state tuberculosis hospital in Salem. But she hated it. So I brought her home, and she eventually died at our home. The next year, I met Teresa Miller in 1932. The Great Depression was still happening, so we had a very practical wedding. I also wanted to help people during this time, this very difficult time, so I tried to employ as many people as I could, just to give them jobs. I also decided to convert one of my chicken coops into a place where people could stay. God blessed me, so I wanted to give back to the people I knew that would be responsible and could use a little extra help. Teresa and I had a baby girl, Helen, but she died very young and is buried in this very cemetery right over yonder. I was so excited that my sister Minnie and Father Scherbring start the Marion home. She donated 8 acres of our family land to build the home for the aged and ill elderly people in this community. My wife Teresa prayed the long form of the rosary for this new venture. She also prayed to the patron saints of farming and weather, since our crops obviously depended on the good weather. At the end of my life, I decided that it was time to die. I became very ill. Well, the doctor was very mad about it because he thought I was just willing myself to die. But I wasn't afraid. I told my wife Teresa on the last evening of my life to pray to Jesus for him to take me. Well, Teresa said she did not want to do that. But when she arose the next morning, she did pray to the crucifix, telling Jesus that the decision was his. The telephone rang a few minutes later, telling her that I had just died. I wasn't afraid. I have lived a very good life, and I knew that heaven would be a wonderful reward for me. I thank God for giving me this fulfilling life of mine. thank you for listening to my story. And since we have a couple of relations on this, was there anything else? Pretty close?
Did good on it.
I think you did.
Phoenicia. I got to get that one. That's awesome.
So the original farmhouse is still?
Yeah, no, it's not correct. There was a barn, so it was just right out here out of town a little ways, and it was actually more out in the middle of the field. There was a big house and a big white barn that was there. That was the Hassler farm.
Do you know how long have they been gone?
Well, Ed died in 2013, so it would have been maybe a couple years.
The church sold it and then it got
Okay.
developed.
Oh.
But originally that house was built by great-grandpa. Originally. And then he died, and Edward, or Grandpa Al ended up with it. And they actually physically jacked the house up in the air 3
To
feet
put-
and hand dug a basement with wheelbarrows and shovels underneath of the house.
Do you know about what year?
I don't know.
Guess.
I don't know. And
30s, 80s?
Well, it was after you said, so Al did that, correct?
yeah, Al,
So after 19, which would have been 1910 or later.
Say before
20.
61 when he died.
Right. Well, and probably before the 40s, 30s probably. Sounds good.
Way before I was born.
Just curious.
When I was born in
he
the
built
40s,
a
it was
second story on
always
that.
high.
Well, the
when I
reason
was
I asked
around
in particular is we
It was
have been
jacked
given
up
to
before we
understand
moved.
the Brown
I'd
house
say the 40s.
originally
30s.
did not have a basement, and they dug it after
Yeah.
the house was built.
The mom was in the
And
brown
I've
house.
wondered
So I came
if
by
they
to see you
raised it
to get a
like
copy
you're
of your
talking
speech
about,
yesterday.
or
Did
if
your
they just
secretary
dug
tell you?
and-
Oh, no.